There's a thing that happens to a man who lives alone too long. He stops noticing his own silences. He talks to the dog, the kettle, the loose board on the porch step that has been promising to break for 9 years and never does. He thinks he's at peace. He's mostly just gone quiet on the inside, the way a well goes quiet after the rope rots and nobody lowers the bucket anymore. I was that man. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest, because if you think this is a story about a hero, you'll spend the whole time waiting for me to do something brave, and I never do. I did one decent thing. One. I left a barn door unlatched on a cold night, and I lied to myself about why. What walked through that door, what I found sleeping in my hay at 4 in the morning with frost in her hair, and a child's shoe clutched against her chest like the last warm thing on earth. That changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about mercy, about what a person will survive and still keep walking. I've never told anybody this whole thing. I'm 71 now. My hands shake when I pour coffee. I figure if I don't write it down, it dies with me, and I don't think it deserves to die. She didn't deserve to die. And for a long while there in my barn in the dark, it was a near thing. So sit down, let the fire burn low. This is the truest thing I've got. The cold came early that year. I remember because I'd written it in the ledger. I keep a ledger, always have, weather and calving and what the price of feed did and didn't do, a habit my father beat into me before I was tall enough to reach the high shelf. October 11th. First hard frost. 3 weeks ahead of last year. Bad sign. My handwriting back then was still good. Tight little letters marching in a row like they had somewhere to be. I was 53. I'd had the place to myself for 6 years by then, ever since the divorce, which is a polite word for the slow drowning of two people who never should have stood up in a church together in the first place. Linda took the good truck and the dishes that mattered and most of what was left of my temper. I kept the land, 400 acres of high country grass that didn't love anybody and never pretended to, and a barn my grandfather raised in 1931 that was worth more to me than the house. I slept better in the barn some nights. The smell of it, old wood and oil and the warm animal dark. I had 11 head of cattle that year, down from 40 in the good times. A bad knee. A truck that started on the third try if I sweet-talked it. And a border collie named Pete who was already going gray around the muzzle and who hated everyone on God's earth except me, and even me only conditionally. That's the man I was the night I found her. I want it clear. Not a saint, not a soft touch. A man who'd gotten so used to being unbothered that he'd mistaken it for being whole. It was the dog that knew first. I'd been asleep maybe 2 hours. The wind had come up after midnight, the kind of wind that finds every gap in a 100-year-old house and plays them like a sad instrument. And I'd given up trying to sleep through it and was lying there listening, the way you do when you're alone and the dark is large. Pete started up around 3:30. Not barking. Pete didn't waste a bark. This was a low sound down in his chest, the sound he made at coyotes near the calves, but lower, more uncertain, like he wasn't sure what he was hearing either. He was standing at the back door with his ears flat and his whole body pointed at the barn. I lay there a while telling myself it was nothing. A raccoon. The wind moving something. I was good at telling myself things, but Pete wouldn't quit, and finally I cussed and got up and pulled my boots on over bare feet and took the rifle down off the pegs because a man alone doesn't go toward a strange sound in the dark empty-handed. Not out here, not ever. The cold hit me like a hand across the face. The yard was silver. There was no snow yet, but the frost had come down heavy and the grass crunched, and the stars were that hard, scattered, indifferent kind you only get when it's truly cold. My breath went up in front of me. Pete pressed against my leg, which he never did, and that's how I knew that whatever it wasn't ordinary. The barn door was shut. I'd shut it. But there was a smell coming off the gap at the bottom, wood smoke, maybe, or something burnt, faint, and under it something I couldn't name then but would come to know well. The smell of a person who has been outdoors and unwashed and afraid for a long time. I eased the door open with the rifle up. And there in the gray dark in the spill of hay in the third stall where I kept the lambing pens in spring was a shape. Small, curled, not moving. For one terrible second I thought it was dead. A body. Out here you hear about it, a hiker, a hunter who got turned around, somebody who walked off into the cold to make a hard decision easy. My gut went to ice. Then the shape made a sound. A small, thin, exhausted sound, half a breath, and shifted, and I saw it was a woman. Young, curled on her side with her knees up to her chest and her arms wrapped around something, and her hair, dark, long, matted, had frost in it. Actual frost, white at the edges where her breath had frozen against it through the night. She had a coat that was too thin. One shoe. The other foot was wrapped in what looked like a torn shirt. And clutched against her chest, held the way you hold a thing you cannot lose, was a child's shoe. Small, red, a buckle on the side. I stood there with my rifle pointed at a sleeping woman, and I have never in my life felt more like a fool, and more afraid, and I couldn't have told you which one was bigger. I lowered the gun. My hands were shaking, and I told myself it was the cold. "Hey," I said, my voice came out rough, unused. "Hey now." She came awake the way prey comes awake, not slow, not groggy, but all at once and entirely, her eyes open and fixed on me before her body had even moved, and there was a terror in them so complete, so practiced, that it stopped me cold. She scrambled back into the corner of the stall, dragging the hay with her, putting the shoe behind her back, and her mouth opened but nothing came out. She'd backed herself into the one corner with no exit. She'd done it without looking. She'd done it like she'd had to do it before. "I'm not gonna hurt you," I said, and I set the rifle down. I leaned it against the stall post where she could see I'd let it go. I don't know why I did that. Every cautious bone in my body said, don't put the gun down with a stranger in your barn. But something older than caution looked at the frost in her hair and the one shoe and the way she'd curled around that little red thing, and it overruled me. "You hear me? I'm just, this is my barn, you're on my land, but it's cold and you can stay. You can stay there, I'm not coming any closer." She didn't speak. She watched me. Her chest was going fast, too fast, and I could see now that her lips had a blue cast to them, and that she was shaking, not shivering, shaking, the deep involuntary kind that means the body's core has gotten too cold and is starting to lose the argument. I knew that shaking. I'd seen it in calves born in a March blizzard. You've got a window with that and the window closes. "You're freezing," I said. I'm gonna get you a blanket, just a blanket. There's horse blankets right there on the rail, you see 'em. I'm gonna toss you one, that's all." I moved slow, the way you move around a spooked animal, narrating every motion, and I took the wool blanket off the rail. It smelled of horse and dust, but it was thick. And I tossed it gentle so it landed near her feet, and I backed off. She stared at it, then at me. Then, with one hand still hiding the shoe, she snatched the blanket and dragged it over herself and pulled it up to her chin and watched me over the top of it with those huge, dark, terrified eyes. Pete had come in behind me. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and this is a thing I still don't fully understand. He didn't growl. Pete growled at the mailman. Pete growled at me before coffee. He looked at this woman shaking in my hay, and he lay down in the doorway with his head on his paws and let out a long breath through his nose, and that, more than anything, was what undid the last of my suspicion. The dog knew. Dogs know. "You got a name?" I asked. Nothing, the shaking, the watching. "All right," I said. "You don't have to. I'm gonna go in the house. I'm gonna make something hot. You're too cold, you got to warm up from the inside, or the blanket won't do it. I'll bring it out. I'm not gonna make you come inside. You can stay right here where you feel safe. Okay?" I don't think she believed me. Why would she? But she didn't bolt, and that was something. I went back across the silver yard with my heart going like I'd run a mile, and I put the kettle on, and while it heated I stood at the window looking out at the dark shape of the barn, and I thought, what have you done, old man? What is this? Who is she? Where did she come from? Where's the child that shoe belongs to? I didn't want to think about that last one. I made the tea strong and put 4 spoons of sugar in it because the body needs sugar to make heat, and I cut bread and cheese, and I found the heavy-down sleeping bag I used for elk season, and I carried all of it back out into the cold with Pete trotting circles around me like he had a job now. She'd moved to the very front of the stall, watching the door, waiting to see if I'd lied. I set the food down on an overturned bucket and pushed it toward her with my boot and stepped back. Sugar's in the tea. Drink it slow or you'll be sick. I dropped the sleeping bag beside her. That'll hold heat better than the blanket. Get inside it. She looked at the tea. She looked at me. And then this thing happened that I've never forgotten. She picked up the mug in both hands and she didn't drink it. She held it against her cheek. Just held it there, eyes closed, the warmth of it against her frozen face, and a sound came out of her that wasn't crying exactly. It was lower than that. It was the sound of a person who has been cold so long they'd forgotten warm was a thing that still existed in the world. I had to look away. I'm not ashamed to say it. I looked at the rafters and I worked my jaw and I waited for it to pass. When I looked back, she was drinking, small sips, watching me over the rim. "You're safe here," I said again. And this time, God help me, I meant it like a promise instead of a thing you say. I sat down on the floor across the aisle from her, my back against the opposite stall, far enough that she could see I wasn't going to close the distance. The cold came up through my jeans. My knee complained. I didn't care. I'd decided something without quite deciding it, that I wasn't going to leave her alone out here, and I wasn't going to force her inside, so the only thing left was to stay. Pete settled against my hip. The wind worked the eaves. The cattle shifted and breathed in the dark down at the far end. After a long time she spoke. Her voice was a ruin, cracked and small. "You gonna call somebody?" It wasn't quite a question. It was the thing she was bracing for. "You want me to?" That stopped her. I watched it stop her, like the question had never been hers to answer before. "No," she whispered. "Then I won't. You don't know you don't know anything about me." "Nope," I agreed. "Don't need to know you're half froze and scared out of your mind and holding onto that shoe like it's holding onto you." I nodded at it. "That's all I know. It's enough for tonight." She pulled the shoe out from behind her then, slow, like showing it to me cost her something. She looked at it in her 2 hands in the light of the lantern I'd lit and hung from the post, and her face did a thing that I can only describe as breaking very quietly, very carefully, the way ice breaks under you before you hear it. "His name's Eli," she said. "He's 4, her breath hitched. "He's not with me right now, he's safe, he's somewhere safe. I couldn't bring him where I was going, it wasn't." She stopped. She pressed the shoe to her mouth. "I just keep this so I remember he's real, so I remember I'm going somewhere, so I don't just..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I knew what the unfinished end of that sentence was, so I don't just lie down and quit. I'd had my own version of that sentence, sitting in this barn 6 years before, after Linda left, with a bottle and the rifle and a long bad night I'd never told a living soul about. I knew the shape of a person who is using one small thing to keep themselves on the road. "Okay," I said, soft. "Eli, 4 years old, he's safe, you're going somewhere, okay?" She looked at me like she expected me to ask more, to pry, to demand the rest of it the way people do. I didn't. I'd learned a thing in 53 years of mostly getting it wrong. That there's a kind of help that's really just curiosity wearing a coat, that wants to know the whole story so it can decide whether you deserve the kindness. And there's another kind that doesn't need the story at all. That just sees a cold person and brings the blanket and shuts its mouth. I wanted to be the second kind. I'd never managed it before. I don't know what was different that night. The cold, maybe. The shoe. The way the dog had lain down. The way the year had come on early and hard and I was so tired of being a man nothing happened to. "There's a heater in the tack room," I said, getting up with a grunt, my knee popping like a dropped stick. "Electric. I'll run a cord out, it's not much but it'll take the edge off and you won't have to share air with the cows." I paused. You can lock the tack room from the inside. There's a bolt. I put it on myself. You'll have a door between you and the world, and you'll be the only one with the key to it. Nobody comes in unless you say." She stared at me. "Why?" she said. "Not thank you. Why?" And I understood that too, that thank you was a currency she'd been made to pay too dearly for, too many times, and that why was the only safe thing to say to a stranger's kindness, because kindness with no reason behind it was the most frightening thing of all to a person who'd only ever been given things with a hook in them. I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I left the barn door unlatched," I said finally. "And I've been telling myself for the last 20 minutes it was an accident, but I don't think it was. I think some part of me's been leaving doors open for years, waiting on something to walk through one, and I think you're it. And I'd be a damn fool to point a rifle at the thing I've been waiting for." It was more than I'd said to another human being in I don't know how long. It surprised me, hearing it out loud. It surprised her more. Her eyes filled, finally, and she looked down at the shoe so I wouldn't see, and her shoulders went up and down once, twice, hard, and I gave her the kindness of pretending to fuss with the lantern so she could fall apart in private for a minute in my barn. "Maria," she said when she'd got herself back. "My name's Maria." "Maria," I tried it, nodded. "I'm Walt." "Walt," a ghost of something crossed her face, not a smile, the country a smile comes from. "Okay, Walt." I ran the cord out to the tack room and got the heater going. It ticked and glowed orange, and the little room warmed up faster than I expected, and I made up the cot in there that I sometimes slept on during calving with the elk bag on top, and I showed her the bolt and made her work it herself, slide it shut, slide it open, so her hands knew they could. By the time I was done, it was coming on 5. The black was going gray in the east. I was bone tired and freezing, and my knee was screaming, and I felt, underneath all of it, more awake than I'd felt in years. Like a part of me that had gone to sleep when Linda left had cracked one eye open. "I'll be in the house," I told her from the tack room door. "Pete'll stay out here with you if you want him. He's good company and he hates strangers, so if anything comes around in the night he'll let you know long before it gets close. Doors open between us. You need anything, you holler, I'll hear you." I hesitated. "I'm not gonna come check on you. You don't have to wonder is he gonna come in. He's not. I'll wait for you to come to me." She was sitting on the cot with the bag around her shoulders and the shoe in her lap and the orange light of the heater on her face, and she looked at me for a long moment, and what was in her face was a thing I didn't have a word for then and only half have one now. Like she was reading me. Like she'd gotten good, out of pure survival, at reading men in doorways, at knowing in 2 seconds which kind they were. And like the reading she was getting off me didn't match anything in her files, and it frightened her almost as much as a bad reading would have. "People don't," she started, stopped, tried again. "Where I been the last 2 years, people don't just let you have the bolt. You understand, they don't give you the lock." "I know," I said, though I didn't, not really, not yet. I'd find out. "Get some sleep, Maria, you're safe. I swear it on my grandfather's barn, and that's the only thing left I'd swear on." I left Pete with her. He went without me even asking, just trotted into the tack room and turned 3 circles and lay down against the cot with a groan, my faithless dog choosing her, and I stood in the cold barn a second longer than I needed to, listening to the bolt slide home on the inside of the door. Shunk. The good sound. The sound of a person, for the first time in a long time maybe, deciding for herself who got to come close. I walked back across the yard. The sun was coming up bloody over the east ridge. The frost was already burning off the south-facing grass and clinging stubborn in the hollows. I got my ledger down out of habit and sat at the kitchen table with my cold coffee, and I uncapped the pen, and I sat there a long time not knowing what to write. In the end I wrote one line, October 12th. I've still got the ledger, you can read it, it says. "Found something in the barn, don't know yet what." I didn't know. I had no idea. I thought it was the end of a strange cold night. I thought, at worst, I'd feed her and she'd rest and she'd be gone in a day or two, and I'd have a story I'd never tell anybody. I didn't know that by the end of that week there'd be a truck I recognized coming up my road, slow, the way trouble always comes. I didn't know about the man who'd put that practiced terror in her eyes, or what he'd already taken, or what he'd come to take back. I didn't know that the hardest choice of my whole soft, careful, unbothered life was sitting 4 days down the road, and that it would cost me more than I had and I'd pay it anyway. And I sure as hell didn't know about Eli, where Safe really was, and what Safe had cost her, and what she'd done. What she'd actually done, in the dark on the worst night of her life, that she was still carrying around in the shape of one small red shoe. But that's the next part. For now there was just the gray morning, and the bolt holding fast and an old dog keeping watch, and a woman finally sleeping, and an old fool at his kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, feeling his frozen-over heart start, against all sense and all caution, to thaw. Not because I asked her to, and not because she trusted me, she didn't, not for days, and she was right not to. She stayed because she had nowhere on God's earth left to be, and because the bolt on the tack room door did something for her that no amount of kind words from a stranger could have done. It gave her a wall she controlled. I've thought about that a lot since. We talk about giving people help, food, money, a roof. Nobody talks about giving a person back the right to shut a door. That turned out to be the thing she needed most, and it cost me nothing, and I'd been sitting on it the whole time. The first day she didn't come out of the tack room till past noon, and when she did it was just to the doorway, blinking in the light, with the elk bag still around her shoulders like a chief's robe and the shoe in one hand. Pete came out ahead of her, stretched, and looked back at her like, "Come on, then," the way he did with the calves. She'd slept maybe 8 hours. I knew because I'd been up the whole time pretending to fix a gate within sight of the barn, which is to say I'd been standing guard and lying to myself about it, the same way I'd lied to myself about the door. "There's eggs," I said. I'd left a plate on the bucket an hour before, covered with a bowl to keep the flies off, gone cold by now. "Cold eggs, sorry, didn't want to knock." She looked at the plate, looked at me, came out slow, sat down on the bucket, and ate the cold eggs with her fingers fast, the way a person eats who has learned that food is a thing that gets taken away if you're not quick. She caught me watching that and slowed down on purpose, deliberate, like she was reminding herself she didn't have to anymore, and the effort that took her to eat slow, to believe the plate would still be there, was one of the saddest things I ever watched a person do. "Thank you," she said when she was done. And then fast, like she had to get ahead of it, "I'll work. I'll earn it. I can do fences, I can do animals, I grew up on a place like this before. I'm not asking for charity, I'll work it off and then I'll go." "Maria." "I mean it, I don't take what I haven't." "Maria." I crouched down so I wasn't looming over her, my bad knee be damned. "You don't owe me a day's work for a plate of cold eggs. But if working makes you feel like you're standing on your own feet instead of leaning on a stranger, then yeah, there's work. God knows there's always work. We'll figure it square. Okay." She studied that. She was always studying. I came to understand that every single thing I said got run through a machine in her head that had been built, piece by terrible piece, over 2 years, and the machine asked one question: what does he really want, and when does the bill come due? That she couldn't find an answer it recognized in me didn't make her relax. It made her watch closer. "Okay," she said. She was a good hand. That surprised me, and it shouldn't have. By the second day she'd reset half the fence line on the south pasture better than I'd have done it, working in a pair of my dead father's boots that I'd dug out of the closet and that were 3 sizes too big and that she'd stuffed with rag. And she worked through the cold without a word of complaint. And when I brought her coffee at the line, she took it and looked at the work and said, "The bottom wire's too low. You'll have lambs under it in spring." And she was right. And I had a feeling all over again that the world was larger than I'd let it be for 6 years. We didn't talk much. That suited us both. But the talk we did do came out sideways in pieces, while our hands were busy and our eyes were on the work, which I've since learned is the only way some things can get said at all. You can't say the hard thing to a face. You can say it to a fence post with another person beside you. Something about that lets the words out. That's how I learned the shape of it, not all at once, in splinters over 4 days. His name was Dale. She didn't say it for a long time, and when she finally did, she said it the way you'd name a disease. They'd been together 5 years. The first year was the one she kept trying to get back to in her head. She said, the good year, the one where he'd been gentle and funny and had looked at her like she hung the moon. Because if she could just understand how the good year became the bad ones, maybe she could understand whether it was something she did. I told her, careful, fixing the wire, that it was never something she did. She didn't answer that. People in it can't hear that yet. You have to say it anyway and let it sit, like seed in cold ground, and trust it'll come up later. By the 3rd year, he didn't let her have money. By the 4th, he didn't let her have the car keys, the phone, friends, her own mother. By the 5th, he didn't let her have a thought that wasn't his first. She described it, and it didn't sound like the movies, the black eyes and the screaming, though there was some of that. It sounded quieter and worse. It sounded like a person being slowly disappeared from their own life, until there was nothing left in the house but Dale, and a shape that used to be Maria, a shape that flinched and cooked and apologized and got smaller every year. And Eli, I said, careful. We were sitting on the tailgate by then, end of the 3rd day, the sun going down red behind the ridge and the cold coming up out of the ground. She went still. The shoe came out of her coat pocket. It always came out when his name did. Eli's why I'm not dead, she said simply. And Eli's why I left, both. I stayed 5 years for me. No, that's not even right. I stayed because I couldn't see a door. He'd taken all the doors. But then Eli got old enough to watch, to learn. And I saw him watching Dale, copying him, the way he talked to me, the little orders. 4 years old. Get my shoes, Mama, in Dale's voice. And I thought, I can survive this. I have survived this, but I will not raise a boy in it. I will not let this be the thing he thinks love is. I will not hand my son to it. The sun went down. The first stars came. I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say to that, and because I'd learned by then that she didn't want it filled. So I waited, she said, for the right day. He had a job 2 towns over, a long one, 10 hours. I had it timed. I packed 1 bag. I got Eli. Her thumb moved over the buckle of the shoe, back and forth, back and forth. And then she stopped hard, like a horse refusing a jump. That's enough for tonight, I said. You don't want to know the rest. I want you to tell me when you can carry telling me, not before. I slid off the tailgate. My knee had stiffened up in the cold. Some things you got to put down a while before you can pick 'em back up to look at. I'll be in the house. Eggs again in the morning, but warm this time, I promise. I'm getting better at the warm part. That got the first almost laugh out of her. A breath through the nose. Not much, but I'd take it. The truck came on the 4th day. I knew it before I saw it. That's a thing about living somewhere quiet. You know the sound of every engine that belongs. The mail truck, the propane truck, the neighbor's diesel 2 miles off. This was none of them. This was a motor I didn't know, coming slow up my road, slow in the way that isn't lost and isn't visiting, slow in the way of a man who wants to see everything before he gets to it. Maria was in the barn. I was at the woodpile. She heard it the same second I did, and I watched 2 years come down over her face like a shade pulled fast over a window, the studying gone, the work gone, just the animal terror back, total and instant, the same look she'd worn that first night curled in the hay. That's him, she said, barely a sound. That's him, that's his truck, oh God, that's. How, I said, how'd he find you? I don't know, I don't, the shoe, did I? I don't know, his cousin's near here, I should have known. I should have gone further, I should have. She was coming apart fast, and Pete had come tight against her leg with every hair up and a sound in his chest like a saw. Listen to me. I took her by the shoulders, first time I'd touched her. She flinched so hard it near broke my heart, but she didn't pull away, and I made myself gentle and made my voice flat and slow. Listen, you go in the tack room, you bolt it, the thing I gave you. You bolt the door and you do not come out no matter what you hear, you understand me. No matter what, you stay behind that wall you control, that's your door. Let me have this part. This part I know how to do. You don't know him. No, but I know my land and I know this. I nodded at the rifle leaning in the barn aisle where I'd carried it out that morning to clean and never gotten to. Go, now, bolt it. She went, shunk. The good sound. I kept Pete with me. I picked up the rifle, checked it, didn't chamber a round, and I set it back against the woodpile where it was within reach but out of sight, because I have buried a brother to a gun pulled too quick, and I had no intention of letting a quick hand make a decision my slow head should make. Then I walked out to the middle of my own yard and I stood there and I waited for the truck. It was a big crew cab, new, too clean for a working man. He pulled up close, closer than you do, right up into my space, which is its own kind of talking, and he sat there a second behind the glass looking at me, and then he got out. I'll tell you, Dale wasn't what I pictured. I'd pictured a monster, some hulking thing. He was ordinary. Good-looking even in a sales kind of way, clean jaw, nice jacket, an easy, loose way of moving like a man who'd never once in his life been told no and meant it. He had a smile already on when he stepped down. That was the worst part. The smile. It was a warm smile, a neighbor's smile, and it had absolutely nothing behind it. And I understood in 1 second how a young woman could have fallen into that smile and how it would have taken her years to understand the dark behind it, because I was 53 and weathered and I felt the pull of it myself for half a heartbeat. He's charming. That's how it works. Of course he's charming. The quiet ones don't keep a person 5 years. Afternoon, he said, friendly. Sorry to come up on you unannounced. Lord, this is some country, isn't it? You got it nice and private out here. He stuck his hand out. Dale. I didn't take it. I let it hang there between us a second too long, and I watched his eyes do a tiny thing, a flicker, the warmth not changing on the surface but something cold turning over underneath, and then I knew him. Right then. The hand told me. The hand had been a test, and me not taking it had told him I knew, and now we were 2 men in a yard who both knew, and the smile stayed on, but the game had changed. Help you, I said. Hope so. He pulled the hand back easy, no offense taken, the picture of reasonable. I'm looking for my wife, Maria. About yay-high dark hair, she'd have been on foot, maybe hitching. She's, I hate to say it to a stranger, but she's not well. Mentally. She gets these episodes, gets confused, takes off. Takes our boy's things with her. He's worried sick, our son, 4 years old, keeps asking where's mama. I've been driving 3 days. Somebody at the gas station in town thought they maybe saw a woman matching out this road. The smile turned sorrowful, just right, just exactly the right amount of a worried husband. I just want to bring her home safe. Get her the help she needs. You seen anybody? It was good. I want you to understand how good it was. If I hadn't spent 4 days with her, if I hadn't watched her eat cold eggs with her fingers and reset my fence line and study every word I said for the hook in it, if I'd been some neighbor he'd caught cold, I might have believed him. I might have felt sorry for him. I might have said, well now, there was a woman, she's in the barn, hold on, I'll get her. That's the thing nobody tells you about evil. It doesn't come looking like evil. It comes looking like a tired husband who just wants his sick wife home. It counts on you being decent. It uses your decency as the knife. And here was the moral weight of the whole thing. The choice I'd been told was coming and didn't know would come like this. I could not prove a word she'd told me. I had her story and a child's shoe and the look on her face. He had a marriage license, probably, and a clean truck and a sorrowful smile, and the law, most likely, on his side. Because the law sees a husband looking for a wife and a son asking for his mama, and the law does not see 2 years of doors closing one by one. If I sent him off and I was wrong, if she was the unwell one, if the story I'd swallowed whole was the lie, then I was helping a sick woman stay lost from her child. And if I gave her up and I was right, I was feeding her back to the thing she'd crawled across frozen country on one shoe to escape. I had about 3 seconds to decide, and no way to be sure, and a man's whole life can turn on 3 seconds like that. I thought about the bolt. Shunk. I thought about her hands learning they could shut a door. I thought about a 4-year-old in another man's voice saying, "Get my shoes, mama." I thought about how she'd flinch when I touched her shoulder and still not run, because some animal part of her had decided I was safe, and how that animal in her had been right about danger for 2 solid years, because being right about danger was the only reason she was still breathing. I decided to trust the animal in her over the smile on him. "Nope," I said, "ain't seen anybody. It's just me and the dog out here, has been for years." The smile held, but the eyes went flat and dead, finally, all the way, and there he was, the real one, looking out from behind the salesman. "You sure about that?" he said, soft now, the friendly gone out of it. "Because that's her in the barn there, isn't it? That horse blanket on the rail's been moved. Cot's been slept in, I can see it through the door from here. You don't sleep in your own barn, friend. Somebody's been sleeping in your barn." He took a step, easy, like it was nothing. "I'm gonna go get my wife now, and then I'm gonna be out of your hair and you can go back to your quiet little life out here and we'll forget you lied to me. That's the deal. That's the best deal you're gonna get." Pete's growl came up out of the ground itself. "Stop walking," I said. "Or what, old man?" He didn't even slow. He was past me, headed for the barn, headed for the tack room door, headed for the bolt and the wall she controlled, and his hand was already coming up to. I'm 71 now and my hands shake when I pour coffee. But they didn't shake then. I got to the woodpile and the rifle was in my hands and the round was chambered, that sound. The one every country boy and every man who's done wrong both know in their bones. And I said his name, the only time I ever said it. "Dale." He stopped, 2 strides from the door. He turned around real slow and he looked at the rifle and he looked at me holding it. And I watched him do the math that men like him are always doing, the cost and benefit, the can I take this, and I watched him land on no. Not because he was afraid to die, because men like him never believe they'll be the one to pay. He landed on no because shooting him would have been the easy story for me, and the easy story is the one they never let themselves believe you'll choose. "You'd shoot me," he said, "over a woman you met 4 days ago, a crazy woman, you don't even know her." And here's the thing I said, that I've turned over 1,000 times since, that I think was the truest thing in the whole business. "I know enough. I know she'd rather sleep one-shoed in a stranger's freezing barn than spend one more night in a warm house with you. I don't need the rest of the story, son. That's the whole story. A person doesn't run toward nothing. They run from something, and I'm looking at the something." The tack room door opened. I about came out of my skin. I told her, "Bolt it. Stay behind the wall no matter what." And there she was in my dead father's 2 big boots, with Pete suddenly at her side instead of mine. And she'd come out. She'd unbolted her own door and come out into the worst thing in her life. And I understood a half-second later why. Because it was her door, and she was the only one with the key. And that meant she was the only one who got to decide when she came out from behind it. He'd taken every door she ever had. He didn't get to make her hide behind this one too, even from him, especially from him. She was shaking, but she stood up straight, straighter than I'd seen her stand in 4 days, and she looked at Dale across the yard with the dying red sun on both their faces, and she said, "But that's the last part." That's where she tells him the thing she couldn't carry telling me on the tailgate. That's where I find out what safe really meant, and where Eli really was, and what she did in the dark on the worst night of her life. That's where I learned that the bravest thing in this whole story happened days before I ever found her in my hay, and that I'd spent 4 days thinking I was protecting a victim when I was sheltering the strongest person I have ever known. I'll tell you the rest. I'll tell you how it ended and how it didn't, and the thing that came up my road 2 years after that I never saw coming. But let me catch my breath first. Even now, even all these years on, this next part still costs me. She stood in the barn doorway with the dying sun on her, and she didn't shake anymore. That's the thing I'll remember when most everything else goes, and at 71 a lot of things are going. The shaking stopped. I'd watched her tremble for 4 days, the deep involuntary kind that comes up from a place words can't reach, and I'd seen it slam back into her full force the second she heard his truck. But standing in that doorway looking at him, it left her. All at once. Like she'd reached down into the bottom of herself for the last of something and found, to her own surprise, there was still some there. "You don't get to call me crazy," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. That surprised me. I'd braced for screaming, and what came out was quiet and level, almost gentle, the voice you'd use on a dog that bites. "You told him I have episodes." She nodded at me at the rifle, but she didn't look away from Dale. "You stood in this man's yard and you said I get confused, that I take off." A small breath of a laugh, no humor in it at all. "You spent 5 years telling me that, every single day. You're confused, Maria. That's not what happened, Maria. Nobody'd believe you, Maria. You can't even keep the story straight. 5 years. And I almost let you make it true. You almost talked me out of my own head." Dale's hands came up, palms out, the reasonable husband, the patient one. "Baby, you're not well. Look at where you are. You're in a stranger's barn. You left our son." "Don't, just that, don't." And he stopped, and I think it shocked him more than the rifle had, because she had never in 5 years gotten to the end of that word before he talked over it. "You don't get to say his name. You came here for him, not for me. You don't want me. You never wanted me. You wanted a thing that did what it was told. You came because he's how you keep me. He's the leash. Get the boy and the woman comes back on her own, every time, because she'll do for him what she won't do for herself. That's the whole trick. That's the only trick you ever had." He was quiet now. The smile was long gone. "Where is he?" Dale said. And Maria smiled. The first real one I ever saw on her. It wasn't a happy thing. It was the smile of a person laying down the last card in a game they'd been losing for 5 years, and finally holding the winning one. "Somewhere you will never, ever find," she said. "I made sure of it before I ever started walking. That's what you don't understand, Dale. You think I ran with him. You've been driving 3 days looking for a woman and a little boy. There's no little boy. There hasn't been a little boy with me since the night I left." Her voice caught just once and steadied. "I took him somewhere safe first, and then I went the other way, on foot, in the cold. I made myself the thing you'd chase, so you'd chase me and not him. I've been the bait for 3 days, you stupid, stupid man. You've been following the decoy. I want to stop here and tell you what that meant, because it took me a minute, standing in my own yard with a rifle going heavy in my arms, to understand the size of what I was hearing. She hadn't fled with her son. She'd done a harder, colder, braver thing than that. The night she left, the worst night of her life, the one she couldn't carry, telling me on the tailgate she'd driven Eli somewhere first. To her sister, it came out later, 200 miles. She'd handed her 4-year-old over in the dark, hugged him, lied to his face that she'd be right behind him, be good for Auntie, Mama's coming soon, and then she'd turned the car around and driven it back toward the danger, ditched it where Dale would find it, and set out on foot in the opposite direction from her child. So that when he came hunting, and he would come hunting, he'd hunt her. The tracks would lead to her. The trail would smell like her. And every mile he chased her was a mile further from a little boy sleeping safe in a town he'd never think to look. She'd made herself the lure. She'd walked into the cold with one bag and lost a shoe somewhere on the second night and kept walking, 200 miles the wrong direction on purpose, holding the one thing of his she'd kept, that little red shoe, the mate to a pair he'd outgrow before she ever saw him again, not as a comfort but as a reason. A reminder of who the cold was for. So I don't just lie down and quit. She'd told me that the first night, and I'd thought it was grief. It wasn't grief. It was strategy. It was a soldier's discipline. The shoe was a mission, and the mission was, stay alive, stay moving, keep the hunter pointed at you and not the boy, no matter how cold, no matter how far, no matter that every step takes you further from the only thing you love. I had spent 4 days thinking I was sheltering a victim. I was sheltering the bravest person I have ever stood next to, and I'm including the war in that. I'm including my brother. I mean it plain. Dale stood there, and you could watch it come apart behind his eyes. the whole architecture of him. Because she was right, the boy was the only power he had, and she'd spent the boy 3 days ago, on a road he'd never find, and there was nothing left in his hands. He'd driven 3 days to collect a leash, and there was no dog on the end of it. There was just a woman who'd stopped shaking, and an old man with a rifle and a dog and a witness and daylight, and men like Dale, I have come to believe, are creatures of the dark and the locked door and the no witnesses. Drag them out into a yard with another set of eyes on them and they shrink. Their whole power is that nobody's watching. The second somebody is, they're just an ordinary cruel man, smaller than they thought, with no idea what to do with his hands. "This isn't over," he said. "It's what they always say. It's the line you reach for when you've got nothing." "It's been over for 3 days," Maria said. "You just got here late." He looked at me. "You're gonna regret this, both of you. You don't know what I know exactly what you are," I said. "I've known since you stuck your hand out. Now you're gonna get in that clean truck and you're gonna drive off my land, and if I see it come up my road again, I won't call the sheriff. You understand me? I won't call anybody. There's 400 acres out here and a backhoe and a dog that doesn't bark, and I'm an old man with a bad knee and not one thing left to lose. So you think real hard about whether you're a gambling man, because I am done gambling. I went all in 4 days ago on a stranger in my hay, and I'd do it again, and I'd do it 10 times worse to you. I don't know if I meant it. I've asked myself for 18 years and I still don't know. I think a part of me did. I think there's a part of every decent man that's just a fence away from the other thing, and a man like Dale spends his whole life never finding out the fence is there, because nobody ever shows him the other side of it. I showed him. He believed me. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because I'd stopped being careful for the first time in my life, and a careless man with a rifle is a frightening thing to do math against. He got in the truck. He sat there a second, and I'll give him this, he tried one more time. He looked at Maria through the glass and he mouthed something, baby or please or some last reach for the warm year, the first year, the trick, and she looked back at him with nothing on her face at all. Nothing. And that nothing was the loudest thing in the whole yard. That was her telling him the truest way there is. You're not even a fear to me anymore. You're just weather. You'll pass. He backed out too fast, clipped my gate post, and was gone down the road in a cloud of October dust. We stood there a long time after the dust settled. Neither of us moved. Pete sighed and lay down. Somewhere down the pasture a cow complained about nothing. Then Maria's knees went, just buckled, and I got to her before she hit the ground and held her up. And she didn't sob. She just shook again. The shaking came back now that it was safe to, now that the work was done, and she said into my shoulder over and over, "I have to get him, I have to call my sister, I have to get my baby, I have to get Eli." And I said, you will, first thing you will." And over her head across my yard. The sun finished going down on the longest 4 days of my life. She called her sister that night from my kitchen phone, the first call she'd made on her own line in 5 years, and she stood there with the receiver in both hands the way she'd held the tea that first morning, like warmth she'd forgotten existed. And when she heard his voice on the other end, when her sister put a sleepy 4-year-old on the line, she made a sound I will not try to describe to you. There are some sounds that aren't yours to repeat. I went out to the porch and gave her the room. Pete went with me. We let her have it. She stayed the winter. That part I'll keep short, because it was quiet and good, and the good quiet parts don't need much telling. She worked the place with me. We got her to a lawyer in town, a hard old woman who'd seen 100 Dales, and there were papers and a record and protections, and the slow machinery of the world finally turning the right way for once. Dale, it turned out, was not nearly so brave with lawyers and judges and a paper trail as he'd been with a woman alone in a locked house. They mostly aren't. He signed what he was made to sign, and he went off to be somebody else's weather, and I heard a few years on that it caught up with him in another state, the way it does. But that's his story, and I don't care to tell it. Eli came in the spring. Her sister drove him out. I'll never forget standing at my gate the one Dale clipped. I'd never fixed it, left it crooked on purpose, a thing to look at, and watching this little boy climb down out of the car. 5 by then. The shoe in Maria's coat would have been 3 sizes too small. He saw the barn and the cattle and old gray Pete, and he didn't see any of it the way a kid who'd been hurt sees things, all flinch and edge. He saw it the way a kid sees a thing he's allowed to love without it costing him. He ran straight at Pete, who hated everyone, and threw his arms around that dog's neck. And Pete, my faithless, miserable, everyone-hating dog, just stood there and took it and thumped his tail in the dirt like he'd been waiting his whole gray life for exactly this. She'd done it, the thing the whole cold walk was for. She'd kept him from the voice, from the "get my shoes, mama." She'd raised him in the end to be a boy who runs at dogs. She didn't stay forever. I want to be honest, because this isn't that kind of story and I promised you the true one. We weren't a family in the way the easy version would have it. She wasn't my daughter and I wasn't her father, and there was nothing else in it either. Not that, not ever. We were 2 people the cold threw together, and once she was warm and standing on her own feet, she did the thing healthy people do, which is build a life with her own 2 hands and her own front door. She moved into town that next fall, got work, got Eli into school, got the small, ordinary, safe life she'd been the bait for. She'd come out weekends sometimes. Less as the years went, that's how it should be. That's not sad. A person you help, if you help them right, walks away from you. That's the whole point. You don't keep them. You're a place they rested. The rest of the road is theirs. The barn went quiet again. The house went quiet. I had Pete a while longer and then I didn't, and the quiet after that was a different quiet than before. Not the dead-well silence I'd had for 6 years, but something with a memory in it, which is the only kind of quiet worth having. Now, the thing that came up my road 2 years after. It was October again. Always October with this story. Cold come early, frost in the hollows, the same hard scattered stars. And I heard a truck on my road slow coming up, and I'll tell you my whole body went to ice the exact same way it had 2 years before, because there's a fear that gets in you and never fully leaves. And for one bad second I was 53 again and Dale was coming back. It wasn't Dale. It was Maria's little hatchback, the one she'd bought with her own money, and she got out and she was different. Lighter. Older in the good way, the way you get when the weight comes off and your face remembers how to sit. And out of the passenger side came a boy, 7 now, tall for it. He had a paper bag in his hands, holding it careful, important, and he walked up to me at my crooked gait, the gait I still hadn't fixed, would never fix. And he looked up at me with his mother's dark, serious eyes, and he said, "Mama says you're the man with the barn, the one who left the door open." "That's me," I said. My voice did something. "You'd be Eli." He nodded, grave as a judge. Then he held out the paper bag. "It's for you. I picked it." He frowned. "Mama helped." I opened it. Inside was a single small thing wrapped in a kitchen towel, and I unwrapped it standing there at my gate with the cold coming up out of the ground, and it was the shoe. The red one. The buckle. The one she'd carried 200 miles the wrong direction on purpose. The mission, the reason, the thing she'd held against her chest in my hay with frost in her hair. She'd kept it all this time. And now she'd had it bronzed, the little leather gone hard and gold and permanent. And there was a thing scratched into the sole, into the bronze, small, where you'd have to turn it over to find it. I turned it over. It said, "You left the door open." I looked up at her. She was standing back by the car with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes wet and steady, not coming closer, letting the boy do it, letting me have it. And we didn't say anything because there wasn't anything that needed saying, and we'd never been the kind to fill the quiet anyhow. I'm 71 now. My hands shake when I pour the coffee. The shoe sits on the shelf my father built, the high one I couldn't reach as a boy, and most mornings I turn it over and read the sole and put it back. People ask me sometimes, the few people there are to ask, what's the one good thing I ever did? The thing I'm proudest of, the brave thing. I tell them I left a door unlatched on a cold night and lied to myself about why. They always wait for the rest of it, the part where I did something. They think that can't be the whole story. It's the whole story. I left the door open. That's all a person can really do for another one in the end. You can't walk their road for them, and you can't carry their cold, and you can't make them brave. She came to me already braver than I'll ever be. You can just leave the door open and put the kettle on and hand them back the bolt and trust them to do the rest. She did the rest. She always was going to do the rest. I just